All right. Now, over our lifetime, what we're saying is that all the things that have happened to you, all the choices you've made, the experiences, what we call active memories, the things that have happened to you that have been traumatic emotionally or physically, and previous diseases, everything like that, so much of that is not always fully resolved and actually stays as memory in your system. And it can actually stay as what we call active memory, and that is memory that is still charged. You know, we know a charged memory. If you say you lose a loved one, say a mother dies or something like that, we know there's a grieving process. And the grieving process is a very healthy process. It's a process of the lungs that is designed to let go of things. It's designed to process your experiences, the emotions, everything like that, so you can process it and let it go. And it's a natural, healthy process. But unfortunately, in our society, we often don't get a chance to fully grieve it because we've still got to get on with work and do other things, or we've got to put up a stiff upper lip according to some cultures, and it isn't completely, we don't completely grieve it. And we know this, the way of knowing it is that, you know, if a year later or 2 years later, someone brings up your mother, if it's fully grieved, it'll bring up and you'll have memories of her, but there'll be memories and you'll be able to make comments, oh, I remember she did that, and you'll be able to talk about it and normal. But if you haven't resolved it, that memory will be painful and you'll actually have emotional factors going on in your system, and it can bring up grieving. And when we have situations like that, and a lot of us have them, and we actually avoid it. That's why we actually avoid talking about certain things, a certain car accident or a certain incident in our life, a traumatic incident, a divorce, all sorts of things like that. Then they are our active memories. And those active memories, the energy of them, we have shown they contribute to diseases. They contribute, they accumulate, and they eventually will bring about a disease. And we'll show that mechanism a little bit later. So every choice and every experience has contributed to your current state of health. Your health is the story. And it's all about the details of what is the causes behind it. Now, when we say the power is in the details, it's very important to realize that it's actually about all the different factors that have gone into it, whereas the modern medical approach tends to look at just the now and just the symptoms. And we're going to go through this, but just as an overall picture, when we talk about diagnosis. In classical diagnosis, which I've been trained in from a medical point of view, from a Chinese medical point of view, from naturopathics points of view, chiropractic, hair diagnosis, iris diagnosis, God knows what diagnosis. And in fact, for a long time, I practiced as a major diagnostician to solve all the tough cases. And basically, the diagnostic procedure was just to collect data. Collect the data from the patient, their symptoms, etc., run a few tests, x-rays, blood tests, things like that, get together a whole bunch of symptoms they're having now, and give it a label. The diagnosis being the label. I learned that the best label you give should always be in Latin, because people are impressed by Latin. Doctors speak in Latin. They'll say you've got glomerulonephritis and hepatitis and fibrositis and things like that. And of course, you know, they'll say you come in with a really bad neck and you can hardly move. And they take x-rays and look at all that, and they'll say you've got fibrositis. And you go, oh my God, now I know why I'm ill. You know, and you go home and tell mum and ring all your neighbours, etc. I've got fibrositis. That explains it all. Oh, what's fibrositis? Fibre is the muscle fibres. Itis is inflammation. So what he's saying is you've got a sore neck, right? And he's going to give you an anti-inflammatory and a painkiller. But you know what? As we'll see, the sore neck, what's the cause of it? What's behind it? Why have you got a sore neck? You know, I could spend another week here giving you all the different causes of sore necks. Anywhere from fallen arches and spinal problems to allergies to emotional issues to problems within the brain to histories of different things that have happened in your life that will accumulate to become a sore neck. And the same goes for most diagnoses. They're not really giving you the cause. They're not giving you the story. They're not giving you the background. And hence, what you're going to do is, once you've got a label, you're going to find a drug or a herb or something that will treat that label or fit that label the best. It never really fits very well. And hopefully it's quite specific. We've got some wonderful labels. You know, there are people with unexplained pain and fatigue and tiredness and joint pain, and really can't get down to any very specific labels. So there's a wonderful one we have used in medicine. It's called fibromyalgia. 1 in 7 people are diagnosed with fibromyalgia in North America. And that's basically the doctor saying, look, I haven't got a clue what's wrong with you. I'll just give you this label, you'll be happy, go away, take painkillers and don't come back. Because they don't know what to do. And yet fibromyalgia is something that responds extremely well with BodyTalk, because we look at its story. And we find that I've treated literally many hundreds of cases of fibromyalgia, and I've never treated the same two cases the same as to cause. There are many different combinations of causes that will lead to it. It can be viruses and emotional factors. It can be musculoskeletal factors. I've seen fibromyalgia that was actually depression from a tumour on the pineal gland and things like that, and plus other accumulated factors. So we're interested in the details. So if we look at a symptom, basically over a period of time, as things accumulate, we have what we call, it's getting used to a new program here, adaptive physiological range. And that represents the body's ability to cope with all these different stresses up to the point that we can no longer adapt without experiencing symptoms. So we accumulate things. And when we accumulate enough, that's when we start getting symptoms. And sometimes we ignore them and put up with them, and we accumulate more, and that's when it starts turning nasty. So if we start out, we can say there are stressors. And there's a bundle of stressors there. From early childhood, family, fathers, yes, well, mothers can do it too. Stresses, and just in early childhood and things like that, the stresses that go on there can accumulate, because they can actually become active memories, things that you don't fully get over. Criticisms, you're not good enough, or you didn't do that well, those types of things that have big impact with us. We can have, a combination. You have that stress, and then you can have injuries. You may, say, injure your knee. And then you make it worse by running on it. Then you get married, and you've got a family. And when you have a family, you have responsibilities, you have stresses, you have financial issues, you have partner issues. And of course, when the family starts to grow, you have even bigger issues, especially at teens and things like that. And then you also have work issues, your boss, your job. These all come together. These all become an accumulation in many different forms until you reach that threshold, and you could end up with neck pain, a pain in the neck, right? That's a very common stressor. We know that the husband at home is often the cause of our pain in the neck. That's why we call him one. Okay? And but he's not the cause. It's a whole lot of accumulations, and then he's just the victim because he's the last one who stressed you. So he gets the blame. Okay? And very occasionally it can be the woman too. See how good I am? I've been told I'm chauvinistic, so I'm determined not to be now, because I've got people all over the world watching. So I've got to be on my best behaviour. I can't be Australian. Okay, I've been living in America long enough to start becoming politically correct. Now, if we put all those together, we see that it can be a neck pain, but those things as a collective, according to what's going on in your body, according to your basic genes and makeup, your lifestyle and everything, those can manifest in many different ways. They will affect you in many different ways, not just in physical pain, but that type of stress can end up manifesting itself as an ulcer, as a stomach ulcer. or as a liver function problem, right? Or as a heart problem. It just, the way they accumulate, the subtleties, and we also have to take into account the genetic makeup that we have and the environmental makeup as to how it actually manifests. So you'll get the same situation building up. And we talk about a person who just sort of bends over to tie up their shoelaces or pick up the soap in the shower, and they get stuck there. You know, they didn't have pain beforehand, and yet they bend over and they get stuck there. And they're in excruciating pain. I think, well, what caused the back problem? Oh, bending over. No, bending over doesn't cause a back problem, right? The bending over is just the last stressor of an accumulated thing. There are all the other different factors, you know, the responsibilities and everything. In fact, it was always interesting for me in my days in chiropractic in Australia, because those days in Australia, many, many years ago, I think just before the First World War when I was in practice, in Australia, most people took their holidays at Christmas. Factories shut down. You know, in the old days when factories just worked 9 to 5 and actually shut down for Christmas. And most people took their holidays at Christmas. It was like our summer holidays, because it's down under, it's summer down there. And that meant that you had all these men stopping work who suddenly now, over the holidays, they were going to have to catch up on all the things they had a million excuses not to do. You know, repair the roof, painting the cupboard, performing in bed, which is often one of the biggest issues, because now they can't say they got tired or they got a headache or whatever. And it was so funny because the day before the holidays that people went on was the busiest day in chiropractic. You always had all these emergency cases of backs that were completely gone. They're doubled over and all coming in, and they were what we call classic psoas problems, where the psoas muscle is contracted. And the psoas muscle is controlled by the kidneys, which relates to fear and stress and, you know, and fear of performance and fear of having to do things. And it also relates to sexuality. And it was a case of all this accumulated, and then the final thing is confrontation of the fact they're going to have to do things. And they're in agony, and of course, that will help them, but they won't get better until just towards the end of the holiday. And they're well enough that they're fine. When they get back to work, they're fine again. And it's incredible how prominent that was and how often that occurred for both sexes. Just in those days, men worked more than women, in so much as a lot of women stayed home. But nowadays, it works just as much in both sexes. So, when we look at all these stresses, in the average person, there can be anything, all the different things that are going on, and even things like poor self-esteem and different habit patterns we get, our belief systems, our attitudes to life, our expectations of life. These are our conditionings, especially by the age of 4, they say that 80% of your personality is formed because your parents have taught you how to think, what's right, what's wrong, what you should expect from life, how you should behave, and what type of belief systems you should have. I know most of us, you wouldn't like to think that your parents have indoctrinated you, and when you grow up, you'll probably indoctrinate your children the same way. And they're part of the things that set up the conditions, because those belief systems and attitudes will cause you to often overreact to certain situations, and you'll create stress. And as those stresses accumulate, and all the other factors that we see here, you're going to end up hitting thresholds where you have symptoms. And this also ties in with what we call epigenetic diseases, because in many genetic diseases that come on during your lifetime, they've actually shown that it's a build-up of what we call the epigenome around the DNA. And these little methyl markers are formed. Now, most methyl markers do good things. They switch on genes to be able to do certain biochemical processes and to make proteins and things like that. They're the normal methyl markers. But whenever we have stresses, any of these stresses, whether they be emotional or chemical from, food poisoning and heavy metal poisoning, environmental factors, those stresses will produce methyl markers. And those methyl markers, so we've got all those circles, They can represent an illness, but they can represent methyl markers that actually attach to the DNA strands, and they accumulate. And when they get to a certain point, the combination will turn on a gene that could be a disease, right? So if we look at a simple case, say Crohn's disease. Now, Crohn's disease is early onset. Most people get it in their teens. That's because it only involves a few methyl markers. The more methyl markers, the later the onset. And so if Crohn's disease, we'll say you've got to accumulate about 8 methyl markers. Well, what happens is you've usually got a couple that you're born with because you've inherited the tendency to Crohn's disease. And then you might accumulate another one in fetal life. Yeah, early childhood's a good time to accumulate a couple of traumas. You know, if you've got an older brother who picks you up and drops you a few times as a baby, and you start getting intense fear of heights and paranoid fear every time he comes near you when your mother isn't around. I was a baby brother, so I knew the tragedy of that. Then the early childhood, you're building up your markers, and then puberty, of course, is good for a couple of markers. The stresses of puberty, you know, dealing with parents who are totally unreasonable and do not understand you're an adult when you're 14. And so by the time you get there, you've actually nudged over. You may be at 9 markers, you know, and you're 15. So what happens is you actually switch on the disease, and you get Crohn's disease. Now you see, this is supporting what I've been saying. Crohn's disease just doesn't appear. It just doesn't come out of the blue. It's the sum total of a series of events. And all those different factors have added up until they finally get to a point where it turns on. So the study of epigenetics, medical study of epigenetics, which we do a lot in BodyTalk because we treat a lot of epigenetic diseases, is about the study of accumulated stresses. And the difference is that our understanding is we work on those, not just on trying to find a drug to cure the disease or relieve the symptoms. And if you work on them, it's a good lesson because you may be, 18 years old with severe Crohn's disease is a disease of the bowel that you have extreme allergy to food and you get a degeneration of the bowel. Often requires whole sections of the bowel to be removed, which when you're a teenager is pretty bad news. And but they may go to a counsellor, and the counsellor may counsel them through the issues they had as a teen. You know, when they're 14 and going through puberty, it might be a problem with a school teacher and problem with the father, not letting them go out and, go to pot parties or something like that. And counsel them, and if they counsel them effectively and they get what we call an aha paradigm shift, then what that will do is dissolve the markers. So if you dissolve those 2 markers, you'll go back under your threshold. And what happens? The disease disappears. Now the counsellor will think they've cured the disease. They haven't. They've put it in remission because it's not really gone. And you see, they'll be cured, but you see, the big trouble is they're only 18 then. A couple of years later, they're going to get a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and that's a disaster, of course, because they're good for more active memories. The arguments, the fights, the disappointments. And so 22, 23, a couple more markers back, the Crohn's disease returns. That's why we usually talk about epigenetics, that so-called cures are really remission. And in any therapy. In BodyTalk, that's why we're very aware of that. So we don't stop at trying to get rid of a couple of markers. BodyTalkers like to continue to work with you to keep getting rid of all the markers if we can. Because if you do, in other words, you're addressing all those factors using the techniques of BodyTalk, and we have techniques for all those things, chemical poisoning of the body, active memories, environmental factors, stresses, belief systems, and so on, then if you can get rid of them all, you've actually, although the potential for the gene is there, it's very unlikely the person will get it again. And this can occur, late onset type 2 diabetes, for example. The reason you don't often get it until you're 50 is it often involves about 40 markers, and it takes that long to accumulate them, right? But it is accumulative. It is exactly like that diagram. All those things building up creating all those factors. And unless you're addressing them, all those causative factors, rather than just treating the symptoms, just alleviating symptoms, then you're not curing a disease, you're actually alleviating symptoms. It's first aid. And in BodyTalk, we don't believe in first aid, except if you fall over and cut your leg or something like that, or break a leg or whatever. Some first aid is necessary. Our subconscious, for example, stores all our belief systems, our memories, and our different knowledge. And that, again, is what part of that story. If we look, the subconscious mind is constantly receiving information. And that information is coming from all over the place. And that's one of the dangers, is that we're getting information subliminally from what's going on with the kids and from a whole lot of different factors, often at levels that we don't even realize we're doing it. And yet they can be getting to us because of old histories and past training. All right, another interesting thing is the way the brain works. That when we imagine an event, because in BodyTalk we use the mind and the power of the mind as part of our treatment process, and we also show how powerfully the mind can work. In fact, I developed a system called Mindscape, which enables us to develop our mind to improve our sporting performances and to be able to improve our study, and also to be able to greatly improve our intuitive ability, which I'll talk about later. And they've just shown that when they wire somebody up, they would get a skier to imagine that they were doing a downhill run in their mind. And what they would register is that run is synapses in the brain showing they were doing it. Then when they kept him wired and had him actually doing it, right, and broadcast the results, the exact same parts of the brain lit up and the exact same thing happened. In other words, the brain did really not know the difference between him doing it for real and doing it in his head. And they've shown this over again. If you see a train out there, certain parts of the brain light up. If you imagine a train, same parts light up. If you dream a train, its same parts light up. The brain doesn't know the difference. And that is why we've actually shown that athletes can save a lot of wear and tear on their body by doing a lot of their training in their mind, the visualization processes, and train themselves into a much higher skill, because they're still training all their coordination when they're doing it in the mind, but they're not traumatizing the muscle patterns as much. And you'll see this is used extensively in elite sports. Another interesting thing about people talk about, oh, maybe your technique is a placebo effect. And what about a placebo effect? And you know what? My answer for that is, gee, I hope it is. I'd like to think it is. Because what's a placebo effect? A placebo effect is something that shows and demonstrates that if a person really believes in what they're doing, or what's been given them, or the treatment they're getting, even though it's a pretend treatment, if they believe it, they heal themselves. Now, what is it actually showing? That the body can heal itself, right? And that's what we're saying. You set up the right conditions, the body can heal itself. Now, the placebo effect only works in certain circumstances and will only work on, less serious type diseases. But it does illustrate how the body can heal itself, and why, when we set up the right conditions with BodyTalk and set up the right communication in the body, then the body does heal itself. So in fact, that is like a placebo effect, although we are still setting things up. So it's important to realize how powerful the body is, and how it can respond in so many very powerful ways. There's been a lot of studies, including one reported in Scientific American. No problem can be solved from the same level of thinking in which it was created. You ever done that? Painted yourself into a corner? Well, it's a metaphor too of painting yourself into a corner.